Well, we must learn to not accept the ideas, thoughts that are given to us. We must suspend belief. And most persons of religious bent have an inability to suspend belief. Or if they do have the ability, they tend to negate that ability and just accept the idea that's been offered to them to believe in, rather than to do an examination of it.
Why do you think that's done so frequently, especially when things like just basic science that we know now, we need a sperm and an egg to create a human? Why do you think it's so hard for especially Africans in the United States to suspend belief?
It has a history in this country. It has a history in Europe. For example, the Europeans, out of their ignorance as an ignorant people and as a non-scientific approaching human beings, that once they took on the incorporation of a religious order, and that religious order comes to them by way of the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire was a great conqueror of Europe, including, of course, the UK, the United Kingdom, which is present-day Britain, or England. Well, the Romans conquered Spain, the Romans conquered Germany, the Romans conquered France. That spread the religious structure or belief system that they incorporated after Constantine became a Christian by virtue of the idea being given to him by Saul of Tarsus, who became Paul. And Saul of Tarsus was an advocate of the Jewish faith. He was a student of the Jewish faith. He studied with some of the very best teachers and advocates of the faith. So he became a heretic hunter. He actually would kill persons who believed in the Yahshua ben Joseph premise, and thereby changing Jesus, who was looked upon as a heretic. So he was very much an advocate of the pro idea that Judaism was the primary premise of God. So he became an assassin. So he was called Saul, the assassin. He subsequently became Paul. He became Paul as a byproduct of him traveling from Jerusalem through Damascus, having a revelation or a sunstroke or a psychotic breakdown or breakthrough, whichever you choose. He then subsequently became Paul and began to advocate that persons who were followers of Christ, as a result of this mirage or this image that he saw of Christ or Jesus or the man that he was very much opposed to, he then embraced the very ideas that in fact he was very much opposed to earlier. That resulted in Rome eventually changing the course of its direction, and Rome, which actually at an earlier time, through stories, would have Christians in the Colosseum and have lions and other things eat them, devour them. Well, he came an advocate to suggest that Gentiles, and the Gentiles are those persons who are non-Jewish, they are Gentiles. So they, in fact, could become Christians because you had to change your approach to become a Jew. So Gentiles were not allowed to become Jewish, you had to be Jewish. So he changed that premise. The result of that is that instruction filtered on over to black people, particularly when the Bible was established in 325 AD as a result of the Nicene Creed. That in turn results in a book subsequently that was translated by William Tyndale into English and written both in Greek and Latin. Tyndale, who was a linguist, changed it and was subsequently burned at the stake, but that became the book or instrument of Europe using throughout the course of history because the Catholic Church became the dominant entity until the schism between Martin Luther and he established Protestantism. So that instrument of the Bible became the instrument by which the Europeans would use to subvert and prevent people from understanding and induce them to only have faith. The African here was given that book and told. Nat Turner was allowed to read the Bible, but he could only read those portions that in fact endorsed and supported slavery. And he actually was used as a person to read those portions to the Africans and were enslaved and tell them that they had to be good servants and good slaves. So that introduction into the lives of African people prevented them from knowing the truth and told them they must suspend belief because they were entitled to be servants of their captors. So that in fact has perpetuated itself and has been handed on and on throughout the generations, so that now the African Kir, and now it's also filtered over into Africa, the continent itself, where the practice of Christianity is a primary approach, because we must have faith in the goodwill of our captors, our colonizers. So that is perpetuated just like diet. So we learn to eat, and diet is passed on from generation. So is belief systems passed on from generation. So therefore, the suspension of belief is something that we have yet to get a handle on.
So this is probably a moot question, but do you feel the inability to suspend belief anchors the African in America to the comforts and laws and customs and regulations of this country?
No, it's done quite the opposite. The African is actually becoming an accomplice to the crime and criminality of that body of people who in fact took the land from a body of people that were here and committed genocide against them. So the African now has participated in that by way of doing what is necessary to support the criminals, to support that which they do, and expect that somehow they should be rewarded for their assisting that which they have committed crime against.
In what way?
In what way? For example, if the idea that you know that this is a stolen land, you know that, let me give you an example in another way. And I've used this example before, but if in fact I and you were driving someplace and I says, look, I tell you what I need you to do. I need to stop off at the store, and you're driving. You say, okay, no problem. I go into the store, and when I come back out of the store, I say to you, I just robbed the store, step on it. If you do not put me out of the car at that moment, but you actually drive off, I just made you, the driver, an accomplice after the fact. Now that's not going to change. You'll always be an accomplice to that crime. Same scenario. If I tell you to, again, stop at the store, on this case, however, I tell you before I go in, I says, I'm going to rob this store. And you say, okay, I'll be right here. And I come back out, get in the car, and we drive away. Then I've made you an accomplice before the fact. There's not a scholar in this country, there's not any professor that has an education, even through high school, that doesn't understand that this land did not belong to the founding bandits. They were thieves, they were robbers. They call themselves explorers and discoverers. No, that's a lie. That is a transgression against the land owned by a body of people, and you take that land and you then make it yours. Then if you then steal a people from their land, and we were happy as a people where we were, and you steal those people from that land, and then you decide as a person who's been captured to then support the very people who stole the land and also stole you, you're an accomplice before and after the fact. Now, to enslave a people means that you've taken them from someplace and you've subjected them to slavery. So the initial parts of our generation, and I'll stay here, we were an enslaved people. We are the ancestors of an enslaved people. But now through our cooperation, where we want to participate actively in maintaining the superior position, whether that be militarily, whether that be economically, whether that be through the process of politics, and we want to support that through voting, we then are willingly participating in a crime that cannot be alleviated, cannot be justified, cannot be rendered null and void, because we know the crime has been committed and now we're willingly participating in it. Therefore, we've gone from being enslaved people to being slaves of people willingly. That's the difference. And that difference doesn't change simply because of the passing of time. That doesn't change. The theft is still a theft. The transgression is still a transgression. The karmic responsibility associated with the out-exchange principle, that you have gotten something of which you've stolen and taken, and you then want to lay ownership to the something that you've stolen, that you've taken, that belonged to someone else, that doesn't change the circumstances of the condition that resulted in how you became an owner of it. Therefore, we still suffer the same problem, but in a totally different fashion.
That's a very interesting perspective. So, especially with the voting, because there are a lot of Black people in America that really stand by voting. And the thing that most will say is, well, our ancestors died for this right, for us to vote.
Our ancestors participated in a crime against another body of people. And we know those bodies of people, their ancestors are still alive. And the ancestors of those persons who are still alive, of the people who initially owned this land, those people are still on reservations, i.e. they are on concentration camps of which they can freely walk about, but they do not have even the benefit of the same kind of political support that we're fighting for. How could we expect those people to support us in a plight against them when in fact we supported in war crimes against them? So why would they have any empathy or sympathy for our plight as a people when we have assisted in the taking of the very thing that they owned ancestrally for thousands of years prior to our being transported here? Not to mention prior to Europeans being here. Now there are people here in this country who says, well, I am an Indian. There's no one in this country that's an Indian. No one. Because that's an incorrect title that's offered to them, name offered to them by a person